Hello, this is part 2 of writing the argument essay. We left off last time with logical fallacies, and we want to make sure that we continue on in our progress for our strategies. So we've given the background on things we're looking for, we're collecting evidence, we're thinking about our audience, what they need, we're looking at the reasons that our sources have, and then deciding what reasons we have, and trying to avoid logical fallacies, jumping to conclusions too quickly without enough evidence. And then at this point, even though we may know early on which side of the issue we're on, we have to create then a thesis, an academic level thesis for an argument paper. So by this point, we should have that. If we've completed all of our research, gathered our evidence, we should have a good idea of why we are for or against something, where we are within that controversy, and what our reasons are. And so when we write it, it has to be an argumentative claim. Okay, so here are the 3 things, be sure to write these down, that are the criteria for what makes it a good thesis. Notice this is a lot longer list than what we've had in the past. When we did essay 2 and we had to evaluate some resources, some sources to see if they were reliable, we had some criteria for the reliability, but this is actually criteria for the thesis itself. First of all, your thesis statement, when you make it, has to be debatable. It has to be written in a way in which readers would or can disagree. Very early on in our study, we had a video on the Magic 3. And one of the examples was a controversial issue about whether women should be allowed to do combat duty. And the sample they gave was that women should be allowed to have combat duty, and had 3 reasons why. Okay, that's a really good model for us. For one, that's a debatable thesis, right? Because there are people who say, no, I don't think they should go out in combat duty, and they will have their reasons, right? So it needs to be stated in a way that people might say, no, I disagree. They may agree with you, but somebody out there disagrees. Okay, that's important, because we're not simply informing, and we are not saying, it's up to you to decide. No, this is your view. This is what you think we should or should not do, and why. Okay, the second criteria for an argumentative claim, a thesis statement, is it has to be what's called plausible. A good word for you to remember with that is possible. Okay, it has to appear, at the very least, to be reasonable and not ridiculous. Okay, so this is not the realm of throwing out some ridiculous claim that can't be done. Just like those wishes, that in our childhood heart we wish were true. I wish this whole coronavirus would just go away. I just wish people would stop being, ridiculous. I wish people should just stop being mean, right? That's not plausible. You can't make those things happen, and no policy or argument can be affected that way. So it can't be something that's just a wish. It has to be something that's plausible, possible, can actually and probably help fix the problem or whatever. And last, it needs to be clear. It needs to be clear that it advances a claim that is easy to follow. Now, every thesis can't use these words, but if you have these words in it and people might disagree, then you probably have a strong thesis statement. Like in the one for combat duty, women should, or women should not, right? That would be the other side. Should be allowed to be in active combat duty, or women should not. That's very clear. We don't have to question what you're for or against. We must pass the Patriot Act, or we must not, or we must revoke the Patriot Act, or we must build the border wall, or we must not build a border wall. It needs to be something that's very, very clear, and not a kind of where we read it and go, I'm not really sure what this is about and what they're trying to get me to believe. In a courtroom, it's very clear. They say we believe that, the defendant is guilty of whatever the charges are, and here's the reasons why. And then the defense says, we're not guilty. Why? Because this, and this, right? Wasn't there, I didn't have a reason, whatever they have their reasons for. All right, let's take a look at some sample thesis statements, and we're going to highlight those must and should words because they just help us identify that claim. And I want you to notice that as we read through these, and if we were in class together, I'd have you take a turn and read out loud for me, but I want you to notice as I read that it's really all on the same topic. What is the disagreement is really having to do with who or what's responsible. So let me read the first one and let's see if we can identify the topic and then the issue of controversy. If for no other reason, athletes should avoid the use of performance-enhancing drugs to safeguard their personal health. All right, so we find that this is a topic dealing with the use of performance-enhancing drugs, typically steroids, by athletes. Why? Because they just they perform better physically. Okay. There are controversies about it because they're illegal or but they're still being used, and there's a lot of pressure for athletes to perform at a high level, and there's I don't know what the line is between what's suitable use of performance enhancing supplements versus things that are considered illegal drugs. I don't know, but in this one, the target is aimed at athletes and what they should or should not do, right? I don't know that you would have a lot of people disagree with that, but if we look at the other thesis statements, we can see why there might be a different approach. It may not be the problem that we disagree with, but how it should be solved. So let's take a look at a second one which addresses the same issue, but proposes a different solution. To eliminate the use of performance-enhancing drugs, athletes themselves must take the lead in policing their sports. Right now there's a shift of focus. In the first thesis, athletes should avoid the use of the drugs to safeguard their own personal health. The responsibility is for the individual athlete to take, and the reason is for their own good, right? Now we look at this one, it's saying, athletes, you are still being responsible, or you should help solve this, but now it's proactive. You have to police your sport, right? That means no longer am I considering myself. I am actually looking around and seeing who else is out there and holding them accountable and possibly even turning them in, right? Whole different solution. Not everybody may be comfortable with that one. Same problem, different solution. Third one, same issue, different solution. National and international governing bodies for sports, we'll come back and define that, should engage in a coordinated effort to educate aspiring athletes about ethics and sportsmanship. Okay, to understand this, let's stop and think a little bit. National and international governing bodies for sports. This is usually where I'd like to ask you what you think that means. And all of our sports followers will jump in and say, oh yeah, the NBA, National Basketball Association. They're the governing body for that sport. NFL, right, for the football league. SEC for conference, our conference, Southeastern Conference, or there's all kinds of college conferences. It just went blank. Big 10, Big 12, all kinds, right? And then international ones, the best example I can think of is the Olympics, right? And they all have these rules about and do drug testing and so forth. So same issue, but this thesis is saying these governing bodies, they're the ones that should step it up and not just punish athletes with the testing and saying, oh, you're excluded, but they need to be more proactive, right? Don't just rely on the athletes themselves to safeguard their own health, which is the first solution, and don't put the burden on the athletes to go and, snitch on their teammates or even their rivals, right? That would create some unhealthy competition. But do something proactive. Engage in a coordinated effort, a collaborative effort. And what are they focusing on? Aspiring athletes. Get them before they start using the drugs. Get them when they're young and educate them about ethics and sportsmanship. So here's a great example of how you can have the same issue, same problem, the use of drugs by athletes that are performance enhancing, but three completely different solutions. And what you would argue is why one particular solution is the best one. It's not that those others might not be good ideas, but why this particular one is good. And they all are possible. They're all plausible. They're debatable. You don't have to get into some moral big issue of, right and wrong or some hot button issue, because this is the real world of problem solving. Okay? These issues that come up and we need to find solutions to, but not everybody agrees on what's the best solution. And that's where this is really going to be useful in your professional world. Okay, and when you get good at it there, it's also going to help you in your personal life as well. All right, coming back, we talk about appeals all the time. Why? Because you're writing with a focus on your audience. Okay, you're there to convince them, not just express your own opinion. And that's a really critical shift, and we have to remember, now that we've got our claim and we've been doing some research, we've got to come back. How are we going to take what we have found? We feel like we have a strong position, we have really good reasons. How are we going to convince our readers? Okay, so again, appeals to authority, that's like the ethos. We respect when experts, testify and say things, and we really prefer that in the legal judicial courtroom, okay, that gets authority. In the professional arena, we respect the people who have those professional degrees, credentials. They're the authorities for that field, whatever it is, accounting, economics, nursing, medical professionals, right? We're going through the coronavirus as I am recording this, and our government officials are having to make some very big decisions, but they are relying heavily on the expertise of health professions to know what to do, because this is not about politics. This is about taking care of our community at the community and state and national level, and even international. And in academic settings, which is our, what we're working on right now, but the truth is that it goes across the board. Now, appeals to emotion, they still have to be included, but they shouldn't be primary. And that happens sometimes when we get passionate about issues, when we really feel like we found the best solution, we feel strongly about something, and we sometimes want to leverage that and try to manipulate people through emotion. And that's not a proper ethical use of emotion. We should help them understand why it's important and why they should care, because that's a key. But we can't do it in a way that is manipulative, right? In a negative way, calling people idiots when they don't agree with this, or ridiculous. That's the kind of language you want to avoid. That's offensive. The people that are reading it will be offended, not convinced. And last, the appeals to principles, values, and beliefs. The last for this screen anyway. And we may have talked about this in class, but I want to make sure we've talked about it here. We have reasons, it's some that are personal, but we can appeal to those principles, values, and beliefs if they're in common and shared by our readers. And many of them are. I mean, just having decency and respect for one another, and caring for the general health and well-being of our community because it's good for ourselves. Those are the things that you have to, you can appeal to, right? When they're too specifically religious, like you'd have to be a Baptist, or you'd have to be a Muslim, or you'd have to be, I don't know, a Catholic to have that value. If it's that specific, it won't work if your audience is made up mostly of people who don't hold to that same religion. So you have to broaden out. They would have in common that you should revere and respect God and honor God, and if that weighs into your topic at all, right? I don't know how it would per se with like the athletes and the drugs. I mean, you'd have to be appealing to maybe the individual. If you knew that all the ones you were appealing to were Christians, you could appeal to that, but largely they won't, they may not be. Caring about one another, caring about those things, the ethical ones, justice, fairness, those are things you can appeal to. But again, it's only effective if the ones you appeal to are the ones that they already share with you. So that's really important. You have to think about that. Character and logic, that's that other kind of ethos, and the logos, which is really critical. And we're going to look a little closer at logic. But before we do that, again, personal ethos. Your own personal ethos as a writer is not yet established for academic or professional audiences. You can't really say just because I said so, or because I have this belief. You're not yet recognized as an expert in your field. You haven't earned those credentials. You might have some personal experience that may add, and that would add to your personal ethos. When the attorney goes into the courtroom, he's not really going in based on his personal ethos. It's not his word against the defendant. He's taking all the evidence and the reliable sources and eyewitnesses and putting them on the stand, right? So you have to borrow from the credibility of the ones that know and have those credentials and the expertise, and you do that through your citing of your sources and your works cited page, okay, and then the proper use of them in your paper. You considerably damage your ethos when you plagiarize. Matter of fact, you destroy it. You harm it considerably. I mean, it puts you in the negative category. You also harm it when you use sources and don't cite them properly. Maybe there's a little bit of a reference and you didn't wholesale out copy paste fraudulently, and I think when students are doing research papers, that's not their intention to plagiarize. But we're going to be talking in the week to come about citing them properly. Doing those things like your MLA format and using the proper essay structures that you're taught and the formats that you're given for that appropriate audience, that's what you have to use. It'll be different when you have a professional audience. When you're in that field, they'll have different expectations. And you'll show your ethos by using the expected formats, the expected criteria, and the right kind of sources. That's what we're learning how to do. It's part of this class. An important part of this class is learning how you do that for yourself at the academic level. And then it'll transfer over for the professional. Finally, appeals to logic. And that's the core, the main part of an academic argument. And it should be for most of our arguments, and certainly in our professional application of these things in our professional world, it should be based on facts and logic and reasoning, right? There are two types of logical reasoning. You need to make sure you write this down. We got some brand new information. We did a little bit of kind of review and application here with the appeals. But you have deductive logic, which moves, and I'll give you some examples, general to specific, and then the reverse type of logical reasoning called inductive, from specific to general. Deductive, from general truth to a specific, and inductive, specific knowledge from a specific instance to a general observation, maybe not a truth, but some general knowledge. Let's take a closer look. Deductive logic, the basic form of this is syllogism, and this was created from the best of our knowledge by Socrates. He used this, he said this is a way of knowing truth. Aristotle said, well, maybe just probabilities. There's some things that we'll never know for sure to be true because we weren't there. But based on certain logic and facts, we can deduce that it was probably true, okay? They still have to be supported with evidence because they're not concrete facts that have already been proven, right? So deductive logic is a way of knowing when we can't know from personal first-hand experience and it hasn't been proven beyond a shadow of a doubt, okay? So it starts as a formula. It's very mathematical. It starts with what they call a major premise, which is a generally known broad category statement that's accepted as fact. It's a broad category, like all men, humans, are mortal, which means all people die. And no one argues that. That's a general category. That's a truth that we accept, even though we don't like it. True, of everybody, everywhere, for all time. It could be, all scientific, like all dogs are mammals or something, right? In the example here that comes actually, by the way, from the Declaration of Independence, is that tyrannical rulers, do not deserve loyalty. And that is a statement that most people would, if not everybody, would say, you're right, tyrant. If your leader is a tyrant, they don't deserve loyalty. You may have to obey them, but they don't deserve your loyalty. Okay, so you start with this general thing that's known category. The minor premise is you take a specific person or thing or item and say it's placed in that category. So if we have everybody, all people are mortal, then you pick a person. And Socrates picked himself. He said Socrates is mortal. Now, he was still alive when he said that, so it couldn't be based on experience. He hadn't experienced death yet. Okay? Oh wait, sorry, I did the conclusion. Socrates is a person. I skipped a step. If you do, it just messes all up. So the major premise was all people are mortal. We have to put Socrates says, well, I'm a person. Socrates is a person, and you can put your name in there, right? You, blank, what your name is a person. Put you in that category. Under the example, they picked King George III. He was the ruler of England during the Revolution in America, Declaration of Independence. And they said, he is a tyrant. So they put him in that category of tyrants. Now, some of these is where you have to stop and offer evidence. After you get past the first couple paragraphs, the very famous paragraphs of the Declaration of Independence, where they talk about life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and everybody being created equal, and then they get into just list after list after list after list of evidences that he is a tyrant. That, he didn't offer representation, that he did, this taxation, he did, took people out of, the judges off their court, all this list. If you've ever read the whole thing, it's just this list of evidence that he acted as a tyrant. And so it's there to prove that he fits that category. If you can prove that your instance, your one specific that's at issue here, because not everybody agreed that King George III was a tyrant, okay? No one really had much argument with Socrates being a person, right? But when you establish that second truth, okay, then you can draw a conclusion that's not yet realized. It's not based on fact or experience. In Socrates' case, he said all people are mortal, they all die. Socrates is a person, therefore Socrates is mortal as well. And we know now that that fact has been established because he is deceased. He did die like 2,500 years ago. Slightly more recent, right? This is a little over 200 years ago in the Declaration of Independence, King George was accused of being a tyrant. In the Declaration of Independence, they stated this as their reason for being justified in declaring their independence from Great Britain. And so once they offered that evidence, they said, therefore, because King George is proven to be a tyrant, he does not deserve our loyalty, and we are declaring our independence. And so that's how they came up with that truth that they believed. And of course, England didn't agree, and there were even some loyalists in America who said, no, we don't agree, but it won out. Okay, so that's one way. You take some general statement that you know is true, and you show how you apply it to a specific. Now, there are errors if you don't use the formula right, which I did accidentally a while ago. Illogical conclusions come up. You don't come up with a truth or a probability. One is if you mess up the formula with two major premises, like the 1, 2, 3 here. All dogs are animals. Okay. All cats are animals. Well, okay. Even though those are both true, you're not dealing with a specific category. Therefore, all dogs are cats? No, that's not true. Why, you messed up the formula, so it doesn't work. Or if you have a premise that is false, okay, like all dogs are brown. Well, you can't start with that and get anywhere because that's not a true premise. That's a major category, but it's not true. All dogs are not brown. So there's no way you're going to come up with a correct conclusion if your premise is false. All right, let's look at inductive. Now, they had some inductive reasoning back in the day, but that really blossomed during this Enlightenment with science and discovery of all these scientific laws and things, and they started doing inventions, and they started creating hypotheses and scientific inquiry and using empirical data. So in this one, you make some observations about some specific things that have occurred, and from that you deduce that it's true at a grander scale. Okay, so if you ever did a science experiment or a fair in high school, you did this. You start out with some kind of question or hypothesis. You observe something and go, I wonder if it would do that every time. It seems kind of silly, but someone did discover the law of gravity as a law, but somewhere they noticed that when they let go of the apple, it fell to the ground. And it's like, does that do that every single time? And you start with that kind of hypothesis. I think that it does every time. So then you have to gather evidence. Usually that means repeating the experiment over and over with various situations, trying to get the controlling factor. If you got a control group and a testing group to see what, is making the difference there. You gather evidence, and then you draw a conclusion from it. And you make what's called an inference, a logical conclusion about the unknown based on the known, which means, okay, I believe that the next time I throw the apple in the air, it's going to come down and fall on the ground. It's not going to just disappear into the clouds. And you have enough evidence to support that. And that's how they kind of came up with a lot of the things that we just accept as fact today, because they went and did that. But we use inductive logic still when we have things that are not concrete facts. They're not empirically proven beyond any kind of controversy. So we use these logical processes to try to come up with the solutions for new problems. Errors here, well, when you just jump to a conclusion, you go, hey, I bet that would happen every time, and you never gather the evidence. You just assume every time. It's the whole thing they're trying to do with the coronavirus. Does it every time this or every time that? It's when you just Fortunately, we have scientists and health officials who are doing research to get that. But on Facebook, people throw stuff out there, even if it hasn't been proven yet. So it happens today too. Not considering other possibilities, failing to gather sufficient evidence to support that hypothesis, that educated guess. So they can lead you too quickly if you just jump to your conclusion. In an academic argument essay, it was just like we would want in a profession. We don't want just your hunch. Okay, your hunch is a good place to start, but you've got to have the facts to prove it. When you go into the doctor's office, when they want to test you for COVID, you may have a reason to think you have it, right? But until you get the evidence with a test that you have it, you can't conclude that what you have. Okay, you can make a pretty good educated guess depending on symptoms, but you won't know for sure until you've had the actual test. All right, now we're going to shift over to the main part of your argument is to build your own case, but we need to talk about how you address counter arguments on the other side. You can't ignore it and expect that your reader just to not be aware. I mean, you're picking things that people are very aware that there are more than one side to this, and they may hold some of those positions, and if you don't address them, then they go, see, they don't know what they're talking about, they don't even know why I think the way I do, and so forth. So you have to be really thoughtful about that. That's why I assigned more than one viewpoint, right? So you would know what the other side is concerned with. So what you do is you size yours up, consider the strengths and weaknesses of your own claim relevant to your argument, and you decide which counter arguments, that's the other side, the opposing view, what claims do they have, and you have three options. Okay, make sure you know what they are, write them down in the definition. You can either concede, I'm going to read them and then I'll give you the definition, so leave some room. Concede their point, refute it, or you can ignore it. All right, let's talk about what those are. The first one is concede. Now, we don't use these words all the time, but that basically means, you know what, on that particular point, I agree with you. Yeah, that might be true. It might be just the concession that we both agree that there's a problem. Or in a legal case, you might say, okay, yes, that's true. You might, if you were the defendant and they said, well, you were there, and you might say, yes, I was there. I'm not denying that I was there, but I didn't do it, right? So conceding is where you say with whatever their claim is, yes, that part of it is true, okay? Now, if you can't leave that there alone without refuting. Refuting is when you say, oh no, it's not, right? And that's our favorite part, like, oh no, it isn't. It's also called a rebuttal. It's when the defendant comes back and says, okay, I might concede that I was there, but I'm rebutting and saying I didn't do it. I didn't pull the trigger. I didn't push them down. I didn't have I didn't, wish harm to this person, and I didn't do harm to this person. And if they choose to, they offer evidence for it, right? You do have the option of ignoring, because we don't have the time and the length of this paper to address every issue that the other side would bring up. So you want to be careful about that. You don't have to bring up everything. And if you don't have something to offset a claim they have, it's better not to bring it up. Okay? So you have to be strategic, but you need to use these in a positive way. So one thing that you want to do is don't avoid a concession. It can help you establish common ground with readers who may disagree with you. And then they view you as someone that, oh, okay, you're knowledgeable. You know the other side too, you're not just blinded to one side or one view. And also you're a reasonable person, because you can look at both sides and objectively and not in a bias, but you've considered all these things and you're a reasonable person. So that really helps you, because that's the reader you're trying to reach. Okay, and then when you say, but I don't agree with this, I refute this or rebut that, and here are my reasons and here's my evidence, they're more likely to listen to you and maybe not worry too much about what you ignored. All right, as we're moving to organizing, we'll be talking more about that in another video about the outline and having a strategy. But I did want to finish, and we're real close to our 30-minute time, your assumed audience. You won't know everybody that's your audience. We're going to be peer reviewing. That will help you. For an academic argument, we're really focused on an open-minded, not a hostile, but skeptical academic audience, and which means we're not, just sitting there going, well, you don't think the way I do, so I don't, like what you have to say. That's hostile. We are open-minded, reasonable, solution-oriented. Let's hear. There's always new information. And that's another reason why to stay away from these moral-based issues, because then we don't have to get in a clash of moral values. We can really talk about, is this a reasonable option? Do you have good evidence? Is this a logical argument that you're presenting, and deal with it objectively? But again, we're skeptical in the sense that we're and critical in a positive way. It means you can't just say it and it be true. You have to be able to prove it. And that's the way it is in a courtroom, and that's the way your clients and customers are going to be in your profession. It can't be true just because you said so. They're going to want proof. And in a courtroom, we're required to have proof and evidence before we lock someone up or fine them or have some judgment against them. So we're open-minded in that way, but you've got to prove your point. So your approach is to have a clear claim, wrapping this up here, stated in your thesis, your reasons for that claim, why you're for it, stated in your topic sentences, and supported with really good evidence from great, reliable, authoritative sources in your body paragraphs. And that is where we're going to conclude today.